Sorry, it was a rough guess on chairs.
Only one off.
I'm not sure April 1st is apropos or not. It's what we're living with today, right?
Good point.
If everyone could introduce themselves for the record for Andrea to get the minutes right.
Guess we'll start. Well, go.
Chief Gates.
Lynette Sampson.
Scott Moritz.
Heather Buchanan.
Ashley Welsh.
Jared Johnson.
Curtis Smith.
Adam Davis.
Eric Anderson. David Scott.
Andy Moldenhauer.
Scott Lockhart.
Nick Coward.
Anytime you want to start.
I was just waiting for you to finish.
Thank you.
So before we get going, is this recording right now?
Yep, we're good to go.
We got the thumbs up over there.
Okay, so video recording is not mentioned in the CBA, and it's also not mentioned in the open meeting law. So for the time being, we would prefer that that's turned off and that we go through our ground rules, and then I think that'll be part of the discussion within our ground rules.
And it's not prohibited either, so we're requesting that it happen.
Then it's not prohibited, but it has to be agreed upon by both sides.
Why do you believe that?
Why would it not?
Because it falls within the concept of recording, whether it's audio or video. I don't think it makes a big difference. I don't think that's necessarily a
Well, but
negotiable item.
it's specifically spelled out as audio recording in the CBA.
But it really doesn't have anything to do with terms of employment, which is what you would define, what I define a negotiable item to be.
Okay, but we still have to both agree upon it.
I disagree.
Disagree? If that's the case, then I think that maybe we ought to talk about neutral site negotiations.
Okay.
The contract says that unless that it normally is going to happen at the municipal building unless agreed upon otherwise, but we can require that negotiations be moved to a neutral site.
Under what provision?
Under Article 36, number 2.
Page 50.
Okay, let's read that. Negotiations shall, okay, be conducted in the municipal unless otherwise agreed. Okay, so that what that means is this is where it has to be unless both sides agree. Should either party require that negotiations be moved to a neutral site outside the municipal building, occurrence by the other side shall be required. We don't agree. So unless there's agreement between both sides, the contract's clear that negotiations shall be held here.
It's funny that you emphasize certain words on that, but it also says that unless otherwise agreed, and it also says that either party shall or either party require.
Well, shall is a definitive word, okay? It's mandatory.
Requires a definitive word.
Well, but hear me out. Negotiations shall be conducted in the municipal building. Now, there's an out then unless otherwise agreed, which means that the parties can agree to do it a different way, but there has to be an agreement, okay? And then you go on, concurrence by the other side shall be required, which means that both sides have to be in consensus that it happens. We disagree. There's not going to be consensus. We're demanding that it happen pursuant to the contract, which is shall be conducted in the municipal building.
And pursuant to the contract, it doesn't need to be video recorded.
Doesn't need to be, but it's not necessarily prohibited.
But we're prohibiting it. We would prefer not to. This is a change.
Okay, can you show me what portion of the contract you're talking about?
Well, recording restrictions says,
Just refer to me so I can look at the language too.
it's the next page, 51,
Okay.
at the bottom. It says, stenography and audio recording shall be allowed. It doesn't say video recording. It says, and this is your word, shall. It says that you can write it down or you can audio record it. It doesn't say anything about video. And those are the only things that shall be allowed.
I guess I'm wondering why video is such a problem.
I'm wondering what the motivation behind doing it is.
Because we are sitting here and the system's set up and it's easy to do.
We've always met in another room. You guys made a location change to meet here. There's never been a problem with negotiating in Paradise in the past. There's never been a problem with not video recording it in the past. So what is the...
Well, I've always thought Paradise was a problem because of the open meeting aspect of it, in case people showed up. And so holding it in a room in the municipal building, which is set up for open meetings, and not knowing how many people from the public will not show up, it just makes sense to schedule it for here. I think we've always been on the cusp of violating the open meeting law in Paradise because it looks like it's a private meeting and not conducive to the public showing up. This I think satisfies.
So does the city make a practice of almost always violating the open meeting because they have several open meetings in that room that are outside of negotiations?
But I'm not talking about anything other than negotiations. That's what we're dealing with here.
Okay. I'm okay with this being the location. You know, we can stand up, we can look around the room because there's an awful lot of the public here, but we still have a little bit of difficulty with the recording.
And I guess, again, why is video a problem?
What is the motivation behind the video?
To make a record of what we have going on here.
And we've always been fine with the record that was compliant with the contract that was audio.
Well, for anybody that doesn't have the ability to walk down here and attend this, I think video makes this, from an open meeting standpoint, access to the public and the community much better.
But you just said that moving the location to this room versus the other room accommodates that and improves that access.
Well, it does, but you never know how many people are going to show up or not show up.
Okay.
So scheduling it here, anticipating somebody will show up as compared to not having any room in Paradise just makes sense. Now, having it videoed here also then gives additional access to people that wouldn't be able or had no intent to come down because of the video access.
Okay. We still disagree with that.
I understand that.
And we would prefer that the video be shut off until we can decide whether or not we agree with it right here while we're laying out ground rules.
And I think laying out the ground, I think everything ought to be videoed so that we have a complete, full record.
Which we have through audio recording as defined in the contract.
I don't see audio recording as being a complete record.
It says that they shall be allowed.
It shall be allowed.
It specifies that those two shall be allowed.
Which
Does not
would-
specify that anything else is allowed.
I understand that. I read that to say that you have to have either stenographic recording or audio recording. It doesn't say that you can't have more.
It doesn't. That's not what it says. It says they shall be allowed.
Which means
No,
but no party can say that we don't want it either stenographically recorded or audio recorded.
Absolutely.
Because it has to be allowed, but it doesn't necessarily restrict or prevent anything additional from happening.
Which is why we're talking about whether or not video recording is allowed.
Well, I think it's absolutely allowed.
It doesn't say it shall be allowed. So I think that that's something that both parties have to agree upon.
I don't read that language to say that. I don't. I see this language because you don't have the unless otherwise agreed language from paragraph 2 as setting a floor, that you have to have this no matter what. Neither party can restrict the minimum of stenographic or audio recording, but you can have more.
Neither party can restrict it. We prefer to restrict the video recording.
Okay, and what I'm saying is we're set up to have video recording, and that's what we're not going to suggest not to have it.
I agree, but either party can restrict it. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do. Oh. Yeah, I think that until we make that decision, I think we should turn it off.
And I disagree.
Let's take a talk.
Okay. Mind if we take a time out real
Sure.
quick?
Hey, you,
And Warm as is available.
you're
Okay.
free to take caucus anytime you want to.
We wanted to make clear in this is that what we're asking for is not, it's compliant with the contract, and it's also compliant with the open meeting law, and that it's not unreasonable that we have this discussion here. This is something that we should have discussed here rather than have one side dictate it.
Okay. It's my understanding that notice was given to you on March 15th, that the negotiations were scheduled for this room and that they would be recorded and live streamed. And we didn't hear anything from you until today. We think that the live streaming and having video recording is really the highest form of transparent and open government, because it shows that nobody was worried or concerned about what is being said at the table and what's not being said at the table, so everybody can see it. It also, I think, gives a better final written minutes, because it's difficult when people are talking over the top, especially when we've got 13 people sitting at the table, and we all have a tendency to talk at the same time, or some of us do, and I'm in that category. And if it's videoed, then the person that is putting together the final notes and double checking of who said what and why, it's easier to look at a video and see who's talking than it is to try to decipher from, excuse me, from an audio that you don't necessarily know what the voices are. We think it's just a better system that ensures accuracy and ensures full transparency in open government, and that's why we're doing it.
Well, we don't feel like we've got anything to hide. We don't feel like as if we're trying to do this so that people aren't able to see where we're coming from. So along those lines, how do you plan on presenting this? How is this going to be put out?
It's live stream.
It's live stream, and so what goes on the city's website and what's going to be recorded from here out and everything, it will be unedited and be out there in full.
Absolutely, it's live stream.
So along those lines, do you guys plan on using any audio visual aids for any proposals or any, because we've been working in the compensation committee and we've been going over numbers and spreadsheets and stuff like that, and we've got hard copy of that we will be passing across the table as we go through this discussion, but is there going to be is that going to be available for viewing? For
If you want to make it
watching?
available for viewing, I'm assuming that it can be set up to do that. That's not a problem.
Okay.
They're
well,
always attached to the minutes.
And all exhibits are always attached to the minutes.
Okay. All right, well, and we want to make sure that we have the opportunity to do that. So in the spirit of moving forward, I think we should go ahead and keep going.
Appreciate that.
So was there anything else that you wanted to cover ground rule wise?
Nothing from our side.
Okay. Obviously, the contract spells out the terms of negotiations fairly well.
Yes.
In the email that you've already referenced, we talked about, Heather mentioned that we would come in, meet with this, and then we would caucus and then begin more of a formal negotiations afterwards.
The substantive, that's what my understanding is, yes.
So if we're good with where we're at right now, then maybe we should take that caucus and go ahead and that would allow for anything to be set up if it needed to be or anything like that. But
Just a point of clarification from my standpoint and from our side, just so we know for sure. I read the contract to be that the only issue that's up for negotiation is alterations to Schedule A.
that's affirmative.
Nothing more or less.
Nothing more or less.
Okay.
That's the way the contract reads.
That's
Which
the way
is-
we viewed it, and that's what our position will be.
And for the people that are viewing us at home, Schedule A is base wage only.
Yes. Okay.
One thing too, just as a quick question, I'd sent an email to your site asking about whether any updates had happened to the spreadsheets we'd been working on in compensation committee and whether or not there'd been any modifications to the last copy that we'd seen.
Yeah, we had already noticed, and Lynette is a listed negotiation member, so communication needs to route through me, not through her. I saw
Okay.
that this morning officially once I got settled after last week. We'll have stuff probably to present later, but I don't have anything that I think we would hand off right now before we go into negotiations.
Okay, well, and part of the reason that I went through her was because she'd been the one working on it, but you were also not listed as a negotiation team member. You were listed as a reference.
Yeah, which means you can talk to me outside of
Okay.
negotiations.
Okay, is that what, well, thanks for that clarification.
Yeah, once under the open meeting law, anybody that's on the team cannot talk to each other away from this table. So if we have a consultant who's not officially a member or you have the same thing, then they can ask for information and stuff, but any communications between team members have to be at this table in a duly noticed meeting. Otherwise, we're in violation. I don't necessarily think this statute makes it for easy negotiations under those circumstances, but that's just the law that we live with.
Well, it's your interpretation of the law. Correct. I mean, I'm not arguing that point, but in a lot of cases, you begin to talk about things, and I feel this way, which is not always the way we feel.
Okay, I can understand that.
So, all right. Well, with that, I think we should probably caucus, and then do we want to set a time to meet after, or do we want to just take a brief caucus and go from there?
Is it going to take you long to decide where you want to go?
I don't think so. Do we?
We're all here. I don't see any reason to waste a lot of time. We might as
No,
well just keep
and-
working toward a resolution.
What's that?
We can make it brief.
Yeah, we'll make it brief.
Okay, excellent.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
This is the spreadsheet, the most recent spreadsheet that we've gotten from your side. It's what we received unedited from the results of the compensation committee. And just for a little bit of background, we started out with 16 cities that we agreed upon, and then over time things got whittled down to these 7. And just of note, these 7 are some of the lowest out of the 16 that we started with. So,
So, just so because I wasn't involved with that meeting, what you're doing is just trying to set up a comparison basis.
absolutely.
Okay.
These are 2912 shifts. They work 2912. The other comps didn't work 2912, and we couldn't agree on how to convert wages. So we picked these because they're all the same.
Yeah.
Not because they were lowest, but because they had the same shift.
Okay. So some of the criteria that we use for compensation is we tried to stay similar population size. We tried to stay 50 to 100,000. Tried to stay within 500 miles with a little bit of flexibility. And we wanted to have full-time fire departments. Additionally, we were trying to do transport EMS where possible, although it's difficult because the majority of departments are not transport EMS where we are. If you, and like I said, this is unaltered. If you review these numbers, they show that we are about 10% behind on the low end of our pay scale and about 24% behind on the high end of our pay scale. One thing of note within that too is that a lot of our comps reach the high end of their pay scale much earlier in their career than ours do, or than we do, because we don't get max compensation until 25 years of longevity. And this was total compensation. This was. I mean, I understand that we're only talking about Schedule A, but this was including all compensation for those departments with some exclusions.
So
Agreed
it's
upon.
just base and longevity. That's these numbers
Yes.
here.
So in reviewing this, there were a couple of items that we felt like were missed. There were some spots where longevity was missed in the scale. Like, for instance, in our department, you can't promote to captain until you have 8 years on the department. And so at that point, as an entry-level captain, yeah, your base wage is a captain's base wage, but you're also starting to accrue longevity. And so we felt like there were some things that were missed. We do have another spreadsheet where we've went through and tried to make those corrections. And so we've got hard copies here
If you have hard copies, if you could hand them out, that'd be great.
of this,
Yes.
or of.
Of everything that you put up.
Okay, so I'm sorry, but we don't have hard copies of this, but it is a spreadsheet that was provided to us by Lynette. So
I'll get a copy from Lynette then.
yes. So what we're handing out right now is this spreadsheet with those errors that we found put in, or at least what we felt like were errors put in. The differences between that spreadsheet and the one that we're passing out are highlighted in yellow, just so that we can show where we made the corrections, and there's notation in red next to it. And let me hang on to that. So if there's any questions, I think Scott can address those.
Yeah, so like Andy said, this is the sheet that we were given initially. It's updated with a lot of the FY19 numbers, which is nice compared to the most accurate ones. And Lynette did a lot of work to dig those up, so thank you. Again, they include base wages, which is Schedule A plus longevity, and step-up pay in these calculations, and that's done because that is what the city desired when we were talking about this compensation committee, was to include all of those things. Again, a few of these we did find were either had minor corrections on the wages from the contract, or were missing longevity. A few of them, if you look down here, there's a minimum number of years of service to reach driver operator. Again, in this case for.
So just before you go forward,
Yes.
are these in the same order that the cities are
They are.
listed
Did I
on the one
cut
we
that off
provided?
on there? I must have cut that off, huh? Okay, I'm sorry. They are the same
Okay,
order.
just
Yeah,
make sure
that
we're in the
was-
same order.
That was a printing error. I guess a user error in messed up printing. Anyway, yeah, they're the same order. So I guess that one, engineer there for driver operator, just as an example, would be Kootenai County. So they have a minimum number of years of service, just like we do, to promote certain positions. And so the longevity is included at the minimum, and then max longevity is included at the max of these. Only the ones highlighted in yellow. And you'll scroll down through to see that there's really not a ton that we found corrections on, but they do have an impact on the overall numbers. So I do feel like they needed to be corrected so we can have accurate comparisons. I guess, does anybody have any questions on those corrections?
Do you have anything that spells out the actual corrections so we don't have to compare this to the previous one? And calculate
Yeah, so
ourselves?
the red, over in the note side, if it's in red, that's what it was. That's
Yeah,
what the
but
correction was.
I guess what I'm trying to figure out is example under first class FF, which is the yellow highlight portion of 2473.
Yes.
And the reason is longevity added. What's the actual number that was added? Because otherwise we have to go back and compare it against the spreadsheet that Lynette did to figure out what the real change was, right?
Yes, you would. It's max longevity for Idaho Falls.
I understand that. I'm just trying to figure out what the number change is.
Yeah, I don't have that prepared.
Okay.
But, I mean,
Okay.
it certainly could be done.
That's fine.
That's pretty easy to come up with.
I will say, so Coeur d'Alene, which one's Coeur d'Alene for captain?
Should we start just by making a note in the margin, just of the order?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, this is the order. I'll pull it up on the sheet that I didn't cut it off on.
Can you read them? I can't see that far.
Yeah, you ready for them?
Yeah.
So Pocatello's at the top.
Okay.
Idaho Falls, Nampa, Coeur d'Alene, Kootenai County, Lewiston, Greeley, and that's Greeley, Colorado, Twin Falls, and then the bottom line is the averages.
This one was approved. It's the same sequence.
Yeah. That's not here.
Is everybody good to go back to the other sheet?
So, yeah, so captain for Coeur d'Alene, I called their HR department, their HR director, regarding the longevity and the 8%. Because we had this email exchange about, well, that base isn't really the base that's shown here because the 8% is added over 3 years, which is really 36% difference, but that started FY18. So the current base for captains right now is the base number in my spreadsheet. In 3 years, this will be the correct captain's starting wage. But those 8% increases didn't start until FY 18-19. See what I'm saying? So you can't go in the base this high until 3 years from now.
So they did not incorporate people that were currently in that position and had 3 years into the appropriate spot within the spreadsheet?
No, so in their contract,
Within their contract.
the captain base, without the longevity bumps, or the captain's base, she said when they went on to their new scale, I can read you the email. Do you want me to read the email?
There's a 3-year phase in, and the number you're seeing
Is 3 years.
is 3 years from now, not the current phase.
Yeah, she said that whoever hadn't maxed out their step, let's see if I can pull this up, they were moved into a certain point so that they could implement that pay scale. And my email is being slow. Oh, I can read it from my contract. It says, I should clarify that when we implemented the new pay range, if an employee was past the 5 years but wasn't yet maxed based on our old pay structure, we did take them directly to the maximum. It was part of how we agreed to implement the new contract. All employees who have been with us under 5 years continue to move forward under the new percent anniversary year. So if they weren't maxed,
So some went to the maximum though.
And some, but some didn't.
Right.
And we're just, base wage is what we're factoring. We're not looking at average of current position.
So are you saying that if they were there 4 or 5 years total service time, they got the full, what percentage?
If they were past the 5 years but weren't maxed out on the old pay structure, they did go directly to the maximum.
Okay, so that would be that number there.
No, because that's with the increases. You see what I'm saying? They didn't get their service time increases. They didn't go in until start now. So the max.
So were they taken to the old maximum then?
So if they were 5 years, they went to the max.
If they'd been there 5 years?
If they'd been there 5 years, they went to the max. So I don't know if that meant if they were a captain for 5 years, then they went to the 29, 25 max. But what I have to do for a range is a brand new captain that comes in is going to be at that minimum. Because we based all of our numbers for this compensation on pay ranges, minimum and max. I didn't look at average because in order to do averages, I would have to do a records request to each of these departments, which we didn't do because I wasn't aware that we were going to look at what the average person made. I was looking at a brand new person in the position, maximum or minimum, and then what they would progress to in the maximum.
Wouldn't they, I mean, if they have a service time requirement to even apply for the position of captain, then there is no range because the entry level is going to include the max, right?
No, you'd go in.
So
You would progress up during your service time to reach those service increases that start this year. But it would be the way, because their pay scale is going to change the way you move through based on your service in that position.
So do they have steps, not singular rates?
No, they don't have, some of them don't outline, some of them do have steps. Some of them just have a range, and then you move with your service time. But where it's different for us is we don't have that. You guys are paid at a rate, one pay. And then you get longevity, which is how we built our max, because we had to add in the longevity.
Coeur d'Alene does have steps in their longevity scale, though, that are based on service time.
Yeah,
Okay.
that start this year.
But it was
Because
in the
they had-
previous contract as well.
Yeah, but then they didn't implement because of their financial issues, and they kept pushing those increases, which is why I assume they're 8% instead of the 3 that were outlined in the previous years.
They only didn't implement 1 year of that contract, and I understand their contract was really confusing prior to this year with their recent negotiations. But there was only 1 year. So even with that, I mean, if that's, is that the only thing that you're seeing? I mean,
Well, I would
'cause
have
we can
to-
try to.
I would have to
We have to compare
caucus
both to
and
see. That was just
compare.
one that jumped out at her.
Because I just talked to them. I'd have to go back and look and see why these were missed.
Okay, well, I think if you guys want to take a break to review those numbers, I think that's reasonable.
Yeah.
Do you want-
Did you? Yeah, sorry, let Scott finish with, yeah.
I guess it's probably reasonable though that we can say that we probably agree that the number is somewhere between the number on this page and this number, right? Okay, so that gets us in the ballpark list here. Okay, so with these really minor corrections, what we've done is taken the range min and max for our comps and average those. And you'll see at the bottom, there's actually 2 numbers on here. The top one is the average and the bottom one is the median. And of course, median is going to be an actual number from that set. So you can see it picked out there. But looking at averages for the range, minimum and maximum averages for all of our comps, we can take those and compare those to we sit in Pocatello for our range minimums and maximums. And making that comparison, you can pull up this sheet here. You'll see columns B and C are Pocatello's minimums and maximums for line positions, PF, probationary firefighter, second class firefighter, first class firefighter, driver operator, company officer, and battalion chief. So company officer, cap. See in column D, the average of our comps for the minimum end of the range for each position. And in column G, the maximum average for all of our comps for each position, the range. You can see where we sit relative to those currently. Anywhere from 84% to 93% of the average of the minimums, or anywhere from 79% to 84% of the average for the maximums on each range. You see, if we wanted to be average and sit in the middle of those ranges for our comps, the minimum range and the maximum range, that is the increase to base wage or the increase to wage that would be required to meet that for the low end and then for the high end. And
So,
then overall average 14% on the low end, 24% on the high end.
so your middle, that would be your max of longevity at 25 years and completely killing it to go to that 19%? Is that what you're saying? Because that's your max, is your longevity. But then you wanted to come in the middle. No, not that one. The goal. Right there. Because you said if you took the median of the minimum and the max, because your high range is your longevity cap out.
Yes. So the goal is to get to match the average. So if we wanted our low end of any given range to match the average of the low ends for all of our comps, that's what we would need, 19% for that position.
Is there a way to get the formulas for each one of those cells set out
Yeah.
and provide that to us so we can then see how you calculated things?
Sure. I mean, it's basically just what percent of our current rate would you have to increase to match this number? So
Seeing the formula makes it easier.
So is this your request?
this is just laying out the information, the facts, I guess.
Okay.
I do have a hard copy of this, yes. In fact, I can. And you have 7 over there?
Yes.
Thank you.
And also, I mean, it's worth noting too here that since we have a disagreement on the number, at least one of the numbers, if you look at the numbers that you gave us about any of the corrections, can we agree that the corrections are reasonable if they are accurate?
I think until we have a chance to go through them and see exactly where I really don't.
Right, I mean, if they're accurate.
We're not seeing big red flags,
Okay.
but until we see the formulas and know exactly what you did, it's difficult to say yes or no.
Okay, so using completely uncorrected numbers, this is where we sit. So 10%, 23%. I don't have a hard copy of this one.
So these are the numbers just pulled off of the spreadsheet that was provided with no correction.
So these are the numbers using the same formulas based upon this information,
Based
not based
upon-
upon the first.
The original.
Based upon the original with the information.
Numbers that were given.
Okay, so this one is based upon this one. Okay. So number 2 and 3, as we looked at them, are related, and number 1 and 4, as we're looking at them, are related.
Yes.
This being 4.
Yeah. Well,
So this being 1,
one.
and then 4 is that
This
last
being
one.
4. Yeah. And so given these, if you guys look through my formulas and agree that they're accurate, which I believe they are, I mean, I think it's reasonable to say that.
I'm not saying that they're not accurate.
No,
What
I
I'm
know,
saying
I know.
is looking at the formula helps me understand what you did.
We're certainly somewhere in between or at one of these two sets.
Okay.
Okay, would you like a chance to review the numbers then?
Yeah, I need the formulas.
Okay, we'll have, are you able to email them?
Yeah,
If you could email them to
Email them to me, I can go find them.
Do you want to break until 1 for lunch?
yeah, why don't we, it's 11:30, that'll give us a chance to go through, then we can have lunch and then be back here at 1.
Convene at 1?
Is that agreeable?
I have one thumb drive. Can I just
Yeah.
give them to you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, Scott will provide those and then we'll break and reconvene at 1.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Like, she speaks English very well,
Yeah.
but like it's just a credibility thing. Like you have to have a degree.
Really?
Yeah. So she's thinking of going to England or Germany, which is weird. Like I would live in the States, but
We don't speak English.
you don't
proper.
get English programs here, I guess. I'm gonna do more on my plate. I could plug it in right now.
A little worried, might as well get started.
Yeah. So did you guys have a chance to review everything and look it all over?
Yeah, I got a couple questions. And going to what I'm calling number 2, which is the second one you put up. I'm noticing that you didn't change any of the Pocatello numbers, which are the ones that are highlighted in red. Is that correct? From the first one you put up, you kept those
No, those should
constant.
all be the same from the first one.
Okay. And so then the numbers that relate to number 3 and number 4, which are these,
Yes.
okay? I'm trying to figure out why you changed the Pocatello numbers.
Those are, yeah, so that should have probably been noted on here. These numbers are based on calculations straight from the contract of what is base wage plus longevity plus step pay.
Okay, so you're including more than just base pay in there.
Yeah, as I said before, that was what we came up with in the committee meetings, the compensation committee meetings, was to include base, longevity, and step pay. And that was what the representatives for the city desired.
Yeah, there were other items that that were not included, like clothing allowance and holiday pay, and that was because it was determined that either you got the time off or you got holiday pay, and likewise with clothing allowance, either you got your uniforms awarded to you or you were compensated for them.
Okay.
So those items were excluded, but.
So I guess to cut to the chase, since we're only dealing with Schedule A, which is just base pay, what do you guys want? What changes do you want to Schedule A?
Well, first off, we'd like to decide, I mean, do you guys agree that that's an accurate representation of where we're at versus the 7 comps that we've done?
On this?
Yes.
Since it includes things other than base pay, I don't think it's relevant. Because we're really talking about just base pay. And so if you're using base pay plus longevity plus steps, or step-up pay as a basis to determine changes to base pay, we're talking about apples and oranges, and I don't see how. I understand this stuff, and I think this stuff has bearing for next year when the entire contract's opened up. For purposes of this year, we're talking about what changes in base alone, because my understanding is the base affects longevity, because longevity is a percentage of base. But we're not talking about using these numbers to justify a base increase, because these numbers include other things that are not base. So I guess I don't see the relevance. We understand and we can analyze these better, but I don't understand how they apply to what we're talking about.
Yeah, and remember from the last negotiations, part of the outcome of the negotiations was that we formed the committee to try to establish what was relevant to make these negotiations go smoother. So are you saying you're rejecting what the committee's agreement was?
No, I'm saying that my understanding is there's been discussions within the committee, especially Heather, that those really don't apply to anything with respect to just talking about Schedule A. So if we're talking about anything other than a change to the base that's set out on Schedule A, then we're exceeding the negotiation requirements that are set out in the contract.
So would you like, so that we didn't waste all of our time and we've reviewed other, 7 comps, would you like to take a little break and compare base wage to base wage?
If you've got it.
And do a comparison? No, we don't have it right now, but we could go through and do that.
Well, I mean, and you can, but I guess the bottom line is we can do all these comparisons and everything, but do you have in mind what you're going to ask for? And I'm seeing shakes of the head no. So you don't know. You don't know what Schedule A changes you want to make.
We've spent the last year working on this, and we've had 30 seconds to think about, only base. So it's kind of a tough question.
But we started out. I asked the question. We're only talking about changes to Schedule A, which is just base, and I think everybody knew and understood that. So the fact that and I'm not saying you don't, I'm just saying that you probably don't have a consensus on your team of what you want to do from a change to Schedule A. I think that's the starting point of, if you're coming in and want to ask for 40% increase to each cell in A, that's a starting point. Now justify it. But I'm just confused because we're just talking about a single schedule that applies just to base pay. And if you have an offer, great. If you need time to kind of put your thoughts together, feel free to do that.
So,
but talking about longevity, talking about adding in and just deducting longevity here and there, adding it into Pocatello, then doing those comparisons, that really doesn't give, I don't think it gives the city a basis to say, yeah, that justifies a change to base pay, because if you're using longevity to justify and combining that and then saying that's what the new base ought to be.
Andy.
Well,
yes.
Do you mind if I address or attempt to address this? Okay. So this information here, and please anyone on this whole committee, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're looking at all this information to get an idea of total compensation. Is
That's right.
an agreement from everyone? Okay, so that's why the information is here.
sure.
And obviously, any changes to Schedule A are going to impact total compensation, and that's why this is being looked at.
Sure.
Is that?
Well, base pay affects total compensation. Nobody's disputing that. What I'm saying is we're not talking about anything other than the one component, which is base pay.
Yeah, they don't
That's
think
what
those
we're here to
exclusive, they don't.
decide this year.
Yes.
Not total compensation, but base pay.
But we can agree that base pay has an impact on total compensation.
Sure, so does
And
longevity.
that's why it's important.
So does clothing allowance. Everything has a bearing upon total compensation. But we're not here to talk about total compensation. We're here to talk about base pay.
So what we're attempting to do is we're attempting to show what total compensation is, so that we can talk about how we get to total compensation through base pay. So that we can decide how we adjust the base so that our total compensation is equivalent to the agreed upon comps.
Okay, I understand that. So how would you adjust the base is my question.
Well, so what is fair? I mean, if we look at total compensation, which we've tried to do, then according to your numbers, we're 10% behind on the low end.
Well,
according to our numbers,
not straight on base. You're talking about total compensation. I don't think this includes total compensation because it only includes base, longevity, and step up.
So maybe you should have been here for those meetings, because we met as a group and we agreed upon what we were meeting for the compensation meetings to compare to each other. And all we're doing is we're attempting to look at what total compensation is, and yes, we would like to modify the base to be able to get to where we're comparable with our comps.
So all I'm asking is, do you have a proposal of how to modify the base, Schedule A, today?
Yes, we do. We'd like to get, we would like to get your input though, and to see what you think is fair. You know, because at the end of the day, we're negotiating 1 year of a contract, and if the numbers, if overall compensation shows that we're, depending on which one you go with, that we're between 10 and 23% behind, or 14 and 24% behind, the end goal should be to get to where we're compensated fairly.
Okay, but and you're talking your 10 to 14 or 10 to 24, whatever it is, behind the whole, talking about total compensation. Okay, you're never going to make that up with just base, because you have to take in changes to all the various steps or types of compensation that go into total compensation. You may add,
which we've done,
sort of, but we're not talking about those changes. So if you're saying that you need to increase the base pay by 10% in order to get your total compensation up to match these others, you and I both know that's not going to fly.
So that's kind of where we're getting to, is that if we're that far behind, if we're 10% or we're 14% behind, then we need to have a plan to figure out how we're going to get there. We need to decide how we eventually reach that point, and there needs to be a plan going forward.
Okay, but this year, if you want it to all come by increasing base pay in order to equalize total compensation, that's a pretty big project for this year, which doesn't take into consideration all of the other aspects.
How is that a big project? It's just increased base percent or base pay Schedule A by a percentage.
It doesn't take into consideration looking at all of the other components of total compensation,
which
and determine which other ones are better to be changed in order to equalize that as compared to base pay.
We're not here to negotiate that. We're here to negotiate Schedule A, and what we're attempting to do is, using the committee approach, which we did, which was your idea of the last negotiations, we formed a committee to figure out what that should be, and the output of the committee reflects a 10 to a 23% disparity between us and our comps.
From a total compensation standpoint, not
yes.
From a base compensation standpoint.
Okay.
Correct.
So the best way to adjust total compensation is through base, which we're here to negotiate base right now.
And I'm not saying it is or isn't. I'm just saying that so I understand that you want to use Schedule A in and of itself without looking at any other component of compensation to close the differential that you claim exists between you and the comps on total compensation.
The majority of our ad pays or our longevity or everything else come off of the base pay.
Okay, so what base pay change to Schedule A do you think is needed to meet that total compensation target?
I feel like we're having trouble agreeing on a common ground here, and I'd be curious what the other committee members have to say too, relative to the meetings we had. I think everyone put a lot of work into this information here, and we came up with some good data to work from. I don't understand why we're wanting to throw it out now.
Well, I don't think we are throwing it out. For me, it's mostly for when there's a full contract open. Curtis had mentioned in one meeting of the comp committee, did we want to talk about longevity this year? I declined because I didn't want to step outside what we defined in the CBA. I felt that was inappropriate. So that is, I mean, Curtis is acknowledging that he knows the city wants to talk about that next year. If we have to look at the whole overall picture, which I think the committee's done a good job of, but there's another piece of compensation that's not included in this. And that's not an ad pay, that's benefits. That's part of total comp.
I think the frustrating part from our side is we spent all this time and we didn't really, I guess, come to some common ground. What did we want to look at in negotiations? Maybe we should have reeled it in and said, okay, are we looking at just base pay and just going off base versus base and hold everything off? You know, I think the committee was trying to do the right thing by saying, by the comparables, but if we were going to look at, you know, and say we are this X amount behind and how do we get there, if we adjust just base pay, if we go off just base pay, then we don't take into account anybody else's add-ons. And I think that's what we're trying to do as a committee, to say, you know, what's fair when it comes to compensation, not overall compensation, because if we're going to look at benefits, you're right, then we got to go look at what everybody else is paying for healthcare, what everybody else is paying for, you know, VBA accounts, or which is a whole nother avenue. And so if we're talking strictly about,
but I don't think that we're diminishing the role of the comp committee, because next year is the full opener. This year in committee, I asked straight out, are we talking about negotiating individual percentages by position, or are we talking about an overall percentage? And Andy told me we were looking at probably an overall percentage. So we already know an overall percentage isn't going to address these all appropriately. So the committee already knew that the full scope of our work wasn't going to be able to be defined at a singular percentage level.
okay, let's just take a clock.
Let's take a quick break. Curtis had to take off, so he won't be here for a while.
This is just the spreadsheet that you handed over. It's just a breakdown with the calculations so you could know what we looked at. We just exposed the formulas and printed them.
So that's just you guys looking at Scott's spreadsheet and looking at the formulas within them.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have the update of Schedule A?
I do, Lynette. Can you hand that out, please?
So this is just reflecting the 1% raise from FY18 to FY19?
Yeah.
This would be the current Schedule A. Lynn, just so I understand it, this updated Schedule A was the numbers that you utilized in the first one we talked about. So in these numbers, this 1% increase was already built in.
Yes. Likewise in the one that we.
Right. You went to the caucus.
So you guys have the same information that we have. We came here today to present to you guys and to try to show you how far behind we are. And you guys have had people on the compensation committee that were involved in the formulation of those numbers. You've also got the base pay numbers, what would be the equivalent to our Schedule A within those other contracts. What do you feel like we're behind?
In total compensation?
In either total compensation or base wage?
I can't tell you for base wage because there's nothing that is split out to say in an apples-to-apples comparison what you're behind on base wage. There's numbers here that gives impressions between, on the low side, 10 and 14, and the high side was at 19 and 24%, depending upon whose numbers you use and the corrections that you made on part of the total compensation package. But total compensation, as Heather indicated before, includes benefits, includes everything. So I can't tell you from a comparison standpoint where Pocatello is on a total compensation, and I don't think these numbers tell us where you're at specifically on just a base compensation. For the hybrid that exists with these numbers, I think everybody has a pretty good idea of where it's at in the 10 to 19 or whatever these numbers show. But that's not a total compensation, nor is it just a base compensation. So that's why I'm saying that I don't consider this to necessarily be relevant for the specific conversations that we need to have concerning Schedule A. It gives some middle ground, taking into consideration longevity and step up, but that's not something that we're dealing with in these negotiations this year. And I think I get the feeling from talking with my side of the team is that the compensation committee was basically, their concept was working together to try to figure out, 'cause it's a tough process, to figure out what is the data that everybody can agree upon on various aspects of compensation, from when you're comparing things, especially, other departments. Now, once you can figure out that there are valid comparison points and nobody's disputing the data, then the hard work of trying to figure out what changes need to be made to this department in order to close the total compensation gap, whatever that may be, between the various components. And that includes steps, it includes longevity, it includes excluding longevity. It can change a myriad of things, including base things. But until you get the understanding of what data everybody accepts, then you start the hard work of negotiating that. That's next year. Now, if you think you were negotiating agreements that bear on these negotiations at that committee, then that committee was then violating the Open Meeting Act.
You were the one that was on the other side of the table when we had our last negotiations.
I wasn't in the committee.
You were the one that was on the other side of the table when we had our last negotiations.
Sure.
And the reason that we formed that committee was because in negotiations, it was the direction of both sides coming out of that, and the idea of meeting as a group was to try to figure out what compensation was appropriate and to try to get that number set.
For the committee?
That was in the last negotiations. What we were, and I don't mean set, but that was in the last negotiations. The intent of forming that committee was to streamline these negotiations and
Okay,
decide.
that's different than getting a number that's set.
Sorry,
That's what you
and
said.
I'm sorry, I misspoke.
And Andy, I agree with you. Streamlining negotiations is basically going through and figuring out what is credible data and what's not, so that we're not sitting here at the table arguing over data, rather than taking the credible vetted data and then using that to reach decisions on compensation. So the committee has done a very good job starting to vet out and figure out what is the data that everybody can agree upon. Then you bring that data to the table, and everybody uses the data to justify whatever position they think is appropriate for each side to get to a compensation schedule that can be agreed upon. And it's a total compensation. But as if we sit here today, the contract on page 10 is very clear. We're talking about Schedule A only.
And you spoke about credible data and trying to achieve having credible data, and that was the intent of the committee, and honestly, we feel like that's what we've been arguing about so far today.
And I agree.
Is whether or not that data is credible.
And it's not for purpose, and what I'm saying is, in my opinion, it's not relevant to deal with the sole concept of changes to Schedule A, which is what the contract says we're negotiating. Now, if it was just base pay comparisons solely, then that's a different situation, but you've indicated it's not. So how can we take data that does not apply directly to and only to base negotiations as set out in Schedule A? That's the problem.
So
now you can use this data and say, from your perspective, and I have absolutely no problem with this. It's just making sure, from your perspective, we think that the base pay is the biggest and most important component of total compensation. And in theory, it probably is. And our plan is to get to have no differential between the comps within the next 3 years. Now, to do that, we have to have a base increase of X this year, not taking anything else into consideration, to be the base for our plan that we're going to bring to the table next year when we're going to look at all components of compensation. Now, and all I'm asking is if that's part of your plan, I'm not saying it is or isn't, but if that's part of your plan, what is that number? So that we can discuss that number. And your data for your overall plan, and you're starting to implement the first stage of that plan this year from a base compensation standpoint. Where are we at?
So that's what we've been trying to establish this whole time, is to establish what that number is, what that base number is, and know what is the right direction to go, and to try to gain a little bit of understanding for whether or not you guys feel that's fair, and whether or not and the best way to try to achieve that. You guys speak with the decision makers on your side.
Sure, so all I'm asking is-
I'm positive that you guys have a number that you've been directed that this is where you're at. And if you don't, then you don't. But like you just said, the base wage is probably the biggest component of that. And so you guys have the information just like we do. So what is the appropriate number to try to get our Schedule A in line with other people's base wage?
And we're not bringing a number to the table with that concept in mind.
At the end of the day, you guys are beholden to the council and to the city, and you guys know the city's finances and what the city's able to afford. And you guys have all the data you need to find out whether or not we're appropriately compensated.
No, those are two different things.
Okay. Well, but
Those are clearly two different things.
you guys do have. You guys have contact with the decision makers. You also know the budget, and you also have an understanding of the budget and what the city can afford. We'd like you to bring us a number.
Well, but you want to talk about your data. I'm assuming you have a number that is justified by your data that is a base increase.
You called that my data. That was the committee's data.
Well,
in fact, the
data-
primary
the data
author of
presented
that
today.
was on your side.
The data presented today. How's that? And you've made some corrections to it, and you sliced and diced it a little bit different by bringing in additional exhibits. So some of it's your data, some of it is a base data. I absolutely agree with you. Absolutely agree with you. Now, if you want me to make the first offer, it's going to be. The problem we have is philosophically, you're saying that your offer is based upon how do you shrink the differential between what your comps are and what the Pocatello thing is, okay? As compared to where we're sitting today from a city standpoint is the city, I think, would love to not have any differential. That takes money. And so our concept is not based upon the differential and the data. It's based upon what the cities can afford.
And our point of view is that the entire point of doing comps is to figure out how we relate to other departments.
Sure.
And that there should be an overarching, you just said that the city would love it if there was no differential. Well, we would love it if there was no differential as well. But we have to have a plan to get there.
And that's true for every city and every business that has employees. Every business, private or public, that competes to keep their employees with their competitors, okay, would like to be in a position to be able to not have salary being the sole factor of whether they get somebody or they don't. Okay, and I think every city in the state of Idaho would agree that they would rather not have differentials. But it still comes down to the differential it's so complex from the standpoint of I don't see your differentials taking into consideration cost of living adjustments. I don't see it taking into consideration benefits. There's other aspects of total compensation that really bear on whether somebody stays or goes to work for one place or another. And so I don't think that this is in and of itself a totality of the information that ought to be considered. But it still comes down to you could be a 50% differential, but if the city can't afford to close that differential, it can't afford to close that differential. And you can have all the data in the world that justifies that we're at a 50% differential from everybody else. And we deserve more, and you probably do, but it still comes down to the dollars and cents of what the city can afford. And so from the standpoint of looking at, is the city trying to say we want to close the differential from and get it to 4% this year? No, that's not in our thought process. Our thought process is what can the city afford. Now, if your offer is based upon how you close that differential, and it falls within the framework of what the city can afford, then it's a win-win.
So we want the city to recognize that there is a differential, but we understand that it's all contingent on what the city can afford. So we would appreciate you guys bringing forth a first offer.
But Andy, no one is at market. It's not just the fire department. Every employee is, double digits behind other cities. So when you talk about differential between you and them, you also would have to talk about differential between a general employee and their general employees.
So
And you
educate
guys-
us as to what you can afford in regards to our Schedule A.
What if we just kept Schedule A flat this year?
Is that your offer? We'll probably need to caucus and discuss it.
Really? You've got a caucus to discuss that?
Yeah.
Both sides want to be reasonable here, and so
But I'm considering
a flat is
I'm
I would
considering
say,
over 500 employees. So your viewpoint, I want to make sure I'm understanding what your 86 need. I can't tell you what your 86 need because that's why they have you. I'm trying to balance the needs of everybody else. So if you give me a number and we can somehow make it work, then we talk about it. But for me, I have to protect the other 400 employees whose salaries and benefits we have to talk about. So it's just, I need your viewpoint to guide us in the direction you need us to move.
And it stands to reason that, you know, just like Scott's been saying, that the city would prefer it to be flat, and I'm sure that they would prefer it to be flat in all positions, not just in the fire department.
What do you mean by flat? Because we're
Well, not
saying-
flat, but sorry, even with with comparables. You know, have people be compensated
I think
evenly.
any employer does not like to compete for wages solely for their employees, because it's just not a good business model. Okay, so the closer you can stay with respect to what your competitors are paying, then other factors of whether you keep good employees or not come into play. So yeah, that's just common sense. But what we have as a situation is that, as Heather says, all employees, when you do a comparison between what comparable employees between other cities in Pocatello, everybody's behind. So closing that gap within the inherent desire that you have to be fair to all employees, it's looking at what the city can afford in totality for the 500, and hope that what that is helps eliminate or reduce the differential, so that when you start looking at all aspects of compensation next year, then everything's on the table and you can look at everything and how it interrelates, plus what's happening with the other employees next year as well. So we have a much bigger picture that we have to look at than you guys do, and I understand that fully. So if you think that this data justifies a base increase, all I'm asking is, what do you think this data justifies?
We feel like that data, obviously, you know, it justifies a base increase, because, and we feel like all employees should get an increase as well. But what we want to know, because we don't control the purse strings, you guys write the checks. So what we'd like to know is what you guys are able to what you guys are able to throw out there, whether or not it's something that we can consider.
Okay. And until we caucus, I don't have a number, but one of the aspects philosophically we have to look at is total increase. And the reason is because some city employees don't have the ability to step up income, and they only have their base. Okay, so from a total income standpoint, we have to look at what does the base have to increase to give the firefighters a total increase of X amount. An example is if the base increase is, say, 1%, okay? The total increase, because longevity is a percentage of base, may be 1.2%. But if you do 1.2, and so if all city workers get 1.2%, then trying to get the firefighters the same from a fairness standpoint, the base wouldn't increase as much, because you've got different other components that increase automatically from the base increase. So when you look at the bottom line, the amount of money that each party puts in their pocket, you've got to massage those numbers to get there. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
So we're looking at totality of what the total amount of increase based upon a base increase would give, and we need to talk about what that number may be.
Well, you guys want to take a break to figure that out?
Sure.
Would you like us to stay or go?
It's not going to take very long. If you want to go, I'll find you. Okay, we've had an opportunity. Put this back on.
Wait for the thumbs up. Huh?
think he's not looking at it this time.
Fell asleep.
No, he's got to click the button back and forth.
It's got a flag.
I don't see his
Yep,
head.
we're good.
I saw him back there. We're back on?
Yep.
It's delayed, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
Okay, we'll have to make copies of this. This is our only one, so don't write on it or lose it. Get it back from you.
It looks really complex.
It is, it's very complex. Like we talked about before we went in caucus, the hard part is figuring out what the total compensation is based upon a base change, so that we can compare that against what other general city employees are getting. And we don't know the exact numbers, but we know that this is probably going to be fairly close in most instances, and we'll crunch the numbers to figure out how close this is or what the net effect of this is based upon total compensation. But what we're proposing is that on Schedule A, that everybody gets 1% increase except for probationary firefighters, second-class firefighters, and first-class firefighters, which will get 1.5%.
And just for clarity, I might point out, that's revised Schedule A.
That's the
Schedule A
revised
itself is actually still the same. That hasn't actually been amended.
This is the revised one that already includes the 1% from last year.
Right.
My understanding is the 1% last year on a net standpoint, the 1% base increase equated to about 1.5 or a little bit more of a total increase. So in total increase, those numbers are probably closer to 2% and 2.75%, or maybe a little bit less than that. We have to crunch the numbers to see.
Where are you getting the 2% or 2.75%?
Well, total compensation based upon base increases.
And this would be a good document to take back and actually crunch numbers on and see.
An example is longevity is based upon a percentage of base. So as base goes up, longevity goes up.
You apparently don't know what percentage those goes up, because I'm not sure why a 1% increase to base would increase 2.75.
But it doesn't. I'm saying
Okay.
that it's probably closer to 1.75 to 2.
Okay.
And the 1.5
All right.
would increase more than that.
Of course.
Based upon last year's being a little over 1.5 for the 1%. It looks like it's about a 50% to 60% greater than what the base increase is what equates to net compensation increase, or total compensation increase.
Okay, well, we hadn't had a chance previously to review base to base in the compensation, between our comps from the compensation committee. We would like to have an opportunity to think about this and to talk about this, and to also just do a little bit of number crunching as far as where we feel with base wage only, you know, or scheduled base wage only with other fire departments. And so we feel like this is a good spot to stop for the day, and that reconvene tomorrow.
What time tomorrow? I think we're scheduled for 11. Can we convene earlier? Is that a problem for everybody?
We have staff meeting.
Notice is also a problem.
That's true.
Oh, yeah.
So we can't convene until 11 tomorrow. That's what the notice says.
That's
right?
what the schedule said.
Okay. Okay. So until 11 tomorrow.
Okay, can we get copies of this?
Yeah.